And the guy was only 400 yards away, hiding in the bushes. If he hadn't been spotted, he'd have shot him from less than 50 yards.
Tax to record levels. They have broken their promises, and it is the working people of this country that are going to pay the price.
Trump just threw himself into the middle of British politics, defending Nigel Farage against Keir Starmer's attacks. Why would the former US president care about a UK employment rights bill? The answer reveals a seismic shift happening in global politics that establishment figures like Starmer desperately want to ignore. Their attacks aren't just about policy disagreements, they're about fear of losing control as the political landscape transforms beneath their feet. Before we move on, I'd like to ask you a small favour. If you appreciate this content, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of you watch the videos without subscribing. It costs you nothing, but it makes a huge difference to us. So, did you click the subscribe button? Great! Thank you so much. Now, back to the video. So what exactly did Keir Starmer say that got Donald Trump rushing to Nigel Farage's defence? Last week, during Prime Minister's questions, Starmer launched a scathing attack on Farage and Reform UK for voting against the Employment Rights Bill. According to Starmer, this vote exposed Reform UK's true colours, claiming they're not actually standing up for working people, but instead representing wealthy interests.
There were people around him that thought it was the right thing that I came.
I thought you were giving all your time to Clacton now as its newest MP.
Well, I'm allowed to come to America on a trip like this, particularly in these circumstances.
20 years as an MEP, but it's not quite the same link or same responsibility with constituents. I will do my absolute best to put Clacton on the map.
Nigel Farage's Reform Party voted against our employment rights bill last week, Starmer declared to the Commons, proving once and for all that they don't stand for working people. It was a calculated move designed to paint Farage as an enemy of the working class, a serious accusation in British politics, where class divisions still run deep. But here's where things get interesting. Reform UK has repeatedly stated their support for sensible worker protections, while opposing excessive regulations that hamper business growth. Their actual position is far more nuanced than Starmer's simplistic characterisation. Reform UK advocates for a balanced approach that protects genuine worker rights while preventing the bureaucratic overreach that can stifle small businesses, the very enterprises that create jobs for working people. The timing of Starmer's attack cannot be overlooked. Why single out Nigel Farage when Reform UK holds just 5 seats in Parliament? The answer lies in the polling numbers. Reform UK has been steadily climbing in the polls, reaching as high as 19% in recent surveys. A striking figure for a relatively new political force. More concerning for Labour is where these votes are coming from. Many are former Labour supporters in traditional working class areas, precisely the demographic Starmer cannot afford to lose.
So what on earth do you do if you're him? And what effect does that have on your confidence?
I will defend our decisions in the budget all day long. I will defend facing up to the harsh light of fiscal reality.
This explains the desperation behind Starmer's rhetoric. By framing Farage as anti-worker, he's attempting to stem the flow of Labour's traditional voter base toward Reform UK. It's a defensive manoeuvre that betrays Labour's growing anxiety about their eroding support among the working class, the very foundation upon which the party was built. What makes this particularly revealing is how Starmer chose to attack Farage specifically, rather than Richard Tice, Reform UK's actual leader. It suggests Labour's internal polling shows Farage's personal appeal is pulling voters away from them at an alarming rate. Starmer isn't concerned about parliamentary vote. He's concerned about Farage's growing influence with voters who once reliably supported Labour. While Starmer fixates on domestic political battles, he's completely overlooked the international dimension of what he's up against. Trump's spirited defence of Farage isn't just about personal loyalty, it signals something far more significant that the British political establishment seems woefully unprepared to counter.
But give us in a few years' time the kind of government we need to turn round the decline in this country. Don't just think Elon or Nick Candy are going to save us.
By choosing to levy the tax on employers, it's then up to employers to find ways to absorb however they can.
That's just disingenuous.
Well,
You will know.
The former US president's intervention into this British parliamentary squabble reveals the depth of his bond with Farage. Trump didn't mince words. "I've been his friend for a long time. It never mattered to me if he did well or not, and I always liked him. But this friendship extends beyond mere personal affection. It represents a growing transatlantic alliance built on shared political vision." Trump's critique of Starmer's attack wasn't subtle. He characterised it as a desperate attempt to push back against Farage's rising influence, noting that the Labour leader's comments were clearly driven by fear of Reform UK's growing presence. The American statesman recognised something Starmer failed to grasp, that his parliamentary manoeuvres were a transparent reaction to shifting political tides. What's particularly telling is how Trump framed the situation in global terms. What's playing out in the UK with Farage is not so different from what we've seen in the US under Trump, he remarked, highlighting their parallel journeys as political outsiders who've challenged establishment norms.
Elon Musk is very supportive of what Reform is trying to do, supportive of me personally, and we've got good connections with him. Nick's got good connections with him as well.
I'm convinced that if we can show that politics can change Britain for the better, then we can face the future with confidence.
This isn't coincidental. Both men have built their political brands on similar foundations. The alignment between Trump and Farage transcends personality. It's rooted in shared ideology. Both champions of tighter borders and more cautious immigration policies. They advocate for national sovereignty over globalist institutions. Trump emphasised that this shared ideology is what makes their alliance so strong and powerful. These aren't isolated political movements, but interconnected parts of a broader international strategy. This coordination among populist movements creates a unified front against establishment politics that crosses national boundaries. While Starmer focuses on parliamentary procedure and employment legislation, he's missing the bigger picture. He's not just facing a domestic challenger, but confronting an international populist movement with sophisticated coordination. The implications are profound. Trump's remarks suggest that traditional political structures are being reshaped by populist figures, whose appeal transcends conventional political categories.
Is that Donald Trump?
We have to be an ally to Donald Trump. And
Does that mean...
Allies don't betray. Allies don't betray the military.
TV station, there's no national newspaper. Belgium is not a nation, and maybe that's why you're happy to sign up to a higher European level.
Starmer and his counterparts in established parties face pressure, not just from domestic rivals, but from an international movement with shared tactics, messaging, and support networks. What we're witnessing isn't simply a political spat, but the painful death throes of Labour's traditional power structure. Starmer now finds himself in a precarious balancing act, desperately trying to defend Labour's values while the ground shifts beneath his feet. The uncomfortable truth is that Labour's core working-class voters feel utterly abandoned, particularly on identity and immigration issues that have become political lightning rods. The polls tell the story Starmer doesn't want to hear. Reform UK isn't just making noise, they're gaining serious traction among voters who once formed Labour's backbone. Even in Scotland, Reform is now going toe-to-toe with Labour in polling data. This isn't a temporary political hiccup, it's evidence of a fundamental realignment.
In doing so, not just do the right thing, but maybe mend some fences between this government and the incoming.
Is obvious, but border security is equally obvious in my view, and that's why I've said we are committed to bringing down immigration.
For voters, the choice becomes increasingly stark. Stick with establishment figures who seem disconnected from ordinary concerns, or embrace alternatives promising to challenge a system many feel has failed them. The question isn't if this transformation continues, but how establishment politicians will respond as their power base crumbles around them.